Well, good evening, guys. Thank you for tuning in to Shield Apologetics, sharing his identity, evidentially leading doubters. This is Pastor Jared France coming to you here with a very special guest this evening. I'm so excited to bring this guest on. This guest has helped me so very much with my ministry. And we have a really tough question that I actually went into, and I needed his guidance and his counsel on this. So I'm so excited about today's talk. So make sure to tune in today. Go like us, of course, always on our Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, our TikTok. And I just want to again thank Liberty General Baptist Church for being a sponsor of Shield Apologetics Ministries, being an outreach ministry of Shield Apologetics for Liberty Church. So my guest today is Dr. Tim Stratton. Tim is a graduate from Northwest University. He is a professor at Trinity College of Bible and Theological Seminary. As a former youth pastor, he is now devoted to answering deep theological and philosophical questions he first encountered from inquisitive teens in his church youth group. Stratton is the founder and president of Free Thinking Ministries, a web-based apologetics ministry. Stratton speaks on church and college campuses around the country and offers regular videos on Free Thinking Ministries on his YouTube channel. Tim, thank you so much for being with us today, brother.
Man, thank you so much for inviting me, Jared. I'm honored to be here, and I've benefited from your Facebook page, and this is just iron sharpening iron, and yeah, you've benefited me also. So thank you for the kind words, but I am honored to be here.
Oh, thanks so much, brother. And we share all the time. You and I comment back and forth with each other. We share a huge, I want to say, brotherly love for superheroes. So, it's always fun to be able to also talk about biblical doctrine, apologetics, and superheroes. You got to add that in there too. So we have a.
So I just saw the new Guardians of the Galaxy.
Okay.
3. Have you seen that yet?
I'm going to see it this Saturday.
Okay, good.
Yep, this Saturday we're going to see it. So I'm super stoked about it. I'm excited for that one, and then The Flash is probably my number one. I'm waiting for. I mean, Ezra Miller and all his stuff. I'm kind of like, oh my goodness, to stay out of trouble. But I'm excited to see Michael Keaton. Michael Keaton was my Batman.
Oh yeah.
So I'm super excited to see him back in the running. So it's gonna be a lot of fun. But right. Okay, Tim, this is the first time you've been on our channel here. So why don't you tell everyone about your background, just a little background about how you got started in apologetics. Yeah, we'll go from there and get into the article that you wrote.
Yeah, well, kind of like you kind of said, kind of encapsulated everything there in the little intro. But yeah, long story short, I was a youth pastor who didn't really care about apologetics or deep thinking theology. I knew the gospel. I was passionate about the gospel, and I like to have fun, so I mean, I had the party youth group. I had a big youth group, biggest one in town, because we were going to have the most fun. And I might throw out a few Bible verses, and I'll share the gospel on occasion, but I was more focused on fun. Anyway, didn't take long before let me turn my notifications off here. Okay. Anyway, it didn't take long until some of the kids in my youth group started to fall away, deconvert, become atheists right in front of my face. Mm-hmm. And when I would try to try to get them to not leave, not deconvert or become atheists, they presented me with arguments for atheism. And I not only could I not argue in return, I felt like these were good arguments. It kind of rocked my faith. Mm-hmm. And so, after a lot of praying about it, I just felt like God was telling me, hey, you've got to go get equipped so that you can have these conversations with high school and college students. Not to mention some of the middle school students were becoming atheists too. It's like, what is going on here?
Right.
And so I went to Biola University first and got a master's degree in apologetics. And then that eventually turned into me going to pursue a PhD in systematic theology. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's how I got here, how I started doing Free Thinking Ministries. It's because I saw the need in the church for apologetics and logical theology.
Yeah.
And uh, quite honestly, most churches today don't take that seriously.
Hmm.
And that's why the church is in a world of hurt.
Yeah.
So it's good to see churches like yours that take apologetics seriously and actually
Hmm.
have a pastor, the
Yeah.
pastor of apologetics, right?
Yeah.
So, man, your church is um, a leader of churches, and as far as I'm concerned. So,
Yeah, it gets to be a lot of fun, and it really is a role playing position too, because you have application, doctrine, and apologetics all feel very interesting all throughout when you're giving a message. And my dad, who's the pastor at Liberty General Baptist Church, Pastor Buddy France, he always it's I always consider, because in high school I played basketball, so I was a 3-point shooter. So whenever you needed a three, my favorite player was Steve Kerr. So as soon as Steve Kerr was in the game, you knew, oh my goodness, this guy, all right, guard the three. So that was a lot like me. So when it became a apologetics pastor, it really was something that was in a need, because certain things were coming up that I had already been reading books and then already diving into all this stuff. And these questions I was excited about. I was ready to go. Not that everyone else didn't have the answers, but it was just a guided direction in apologetics. And that's when we came up with the point to say, hey, we need someone to be able to just, this is their station. If something comes up, we need to send them here. And that was really cool. So my dad has been a wonderful blessing to me, because not a lot of pastors do that. Not a lot of pastors are going to be able to say, especially when my first message, when he introduced apologetics to the church, my first message was on the Big Bang. And the first thing I said was, I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. And the church went quiet. So, so it was a adjustment, but my dad has been so amazing, and he trusts me and what I'm doing, and he knows my heart. And man, he's been just so awesome, and guiding that way and permitting that way, I should say, for his church to be able to kind of guide people to the truth using apologetics. So it's been fantastic.
that's awesome.
So, but yeah, I mean, honestly, you and I have pretty much started in the same thing. That's where the big thing with apologetics I came into was, I was doing the same thing as you in youth ministry. It was like, okay, let's play a lot of games. Let's watch movies. I got candy. I got pizza. Let's go do this. Oh, here's a devotional.
Mm-hmm.
Let's read this little devotional. All right, memorize the verse for next week. Cool. All right, see you guys.
Yeah, right.
And that was it. Then all of a sudden, does God exist? Why is the Bible true? How do we know Jesus even existed? All these tough questions started to come up. And then I looked back at one of my journals when I first started preaching, and I'm like, why did they let me preach first and foremost? But I think that's good for us. I think it really gives us a good direction to go as apologists, to say, okay, here's where it's hurting. Here's where we have the need, and then God directing us to that next step. But yeah, I'm so excited about today's topic, and it's being led from the question that we had in our Sunday school class at church of, why didn't God just create us in heaven? And then we had another question pop up about what happens to babies when they die. So I am so blessed to have Tim as my friend, and I was able to message him and be able to get this going. And he wrote an article about it, and that's what we're going to go through today. So we're going to hit a few objections, and we're going to hit some good, satisfying answers, I feel, at the very end. So Tim, let's tackle the first question that people come up, and I know we want to do this with being very sensitive and compassionate, because I know a lot of people who have been comforted with the position of all babies go to heaven and everything like that. And I know we want to be very careful and understand our hearts of coming here into this question. Number one, we serve a just and loving God. Everybody in heaven, that everybody who will be in heaven will be in heaven. Everybody who will be in hell will be in hell, and it will be from a just and fair and loving God in the very end. So regardless if you're listening to us today and you're like, well, that's not a satisfying answer, and you're a Christian, we can still rely on that justice of God, where he is fair, he is loving, he is just in the end. No one will be in heaven who doesn't deserve to be there. No one will be in hell who doesn't deserve to be there. in that way. So, but we want to get into the first part about all infants who die go to heaven. Tim, go ahead and take this one for us, and we'll dive into the first point here.
Yeah. So, I mean, before I get started, I just want to say that I think out of all the theological questions that I've been presented with, what I don't think the idea of the Trinity is hard to understand. In fact, I it makes sense to me, right? I can grasp it. I can explain it. I can give models showing how we ought to think about the Trinity. It's not a big issue. A lot of people think, oh, that's the hardest question. No, it's not. That's easy. The incarnation, easy. I there's so many different theological issues. The problem of evil. I spend most of my time arguing against that. Published articles and published in my book about arguing against the problem of evil. Why would God allow pain, evil, and suffering? Why would God allow moral evil, natural evil? What's up with divine hiddenness? All these things. I don't think they're problems. What is a problem? What do we do with babies who die? Not only is it emotional, so there's a pastoral element involved.
Yeah.
But what do we do as philosophers or Christian philosophers and good biblical systematic theologians want to answer this question? And I think the church has offered, has made some mistakes along the way. So I wrote an article back in 2016 about how to think about this. And I offer several different ideas that the church has advanced. And so the first one is that all infants who die go to heaven. And that sounds great. That's at face value. We all want to affirm that, right? And that's the position that I affirmed for years and years and years, ever since I was a little kid, I think. So anyway, some argue, I wrote in the article that some argue that since God is perfectly good, that all babies who die will go to heaven. And they offer Bible verses such as 2 Samuel 12, 15 through 23. This is where, David knew he would see his son again in the afterlife. And David's son died as a baby, and he knew that he would see his son again. And then also Luke 18, 15 and 16, that's where Jesus says, let the little children come to me. And the church has offered Bible verses like these as support for this view. But when you look at that, I think it's a stretch. It's a giant leap then to conclude from these scriptures that therefore all babies who die go to heaven, even though I'd like it to be true.
Right.
But those supporting this view say that since these little ones are not even responsible for any of their thoughts or actions, then they would not be eternally punished by a good God for any moral sins. Now, I agree that they should not be punished, but the problem is this. If that's the case, then wouldn't it be good for God to keep all humans in a mental state in which they could not make free and informed decisions to morally sin here on this planet? I mean, if God did that, then he could have his desire of universal salvation, according to 1 Timothy 2:4 and 2 Peter 3:9. Moreover, these infants would then be forced into a state of affairs against their will or lack of will. And so that is to say that they had no choice in the matter, if this is how it is. So if that's the case, it seems that these little ones would never be able to say yes to God's eternal marriage proposal. And therefore, it seems like they'd be missing out on a vital piece of maximal love, something that makes heaven awesome. It's maximal love with our Creator. We're not forced into his presence, but we get to make a free and informed decision. And also then those who aren't in heaven make a free and informed decision to reject God. Well, if babies die, they don't get an opportunity to make a choice. So they're forced into God's presence. So I think that's a problem. Paul stated in 2 Corinthians 4:17 that a world full of suffering is actually good for humans, as it, quote, prepares us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, end quote. So thus, accordingly, the babies who died, say in the first trimester in the womb, did not experience much, if any, affliction or pain, evil, and suffering to prepare them for eternal heaven. So, and then the last thing I said is on this point is that this view of universal infant salvation is incompatible with another commonly held Christian belief of the once saved, always saved, unless one also affirms universal salvation for all people. So this is what one of my friends and colleagues said on the matter. He said each individual would go from the saved state as a baby to the default unsaved state as an adult before freely choosing to accept salvation. And I think he's onto something there. And so although this has been the view I held for decades before writing this article and researching this topic, I now find this hypothesis untenable. And so I reluctantly reject it. And I just want to add too that if this is the case, here's where it starts to get absurd here. If all babies who die go to heaven, then although Christians are marching against abortion in the streets, behind closed doors, we should be for it. Because man, if we could have just aborted Richard Dawkins,
right, and saved him, and
he would have been saved. Yeah.
Would you say that then puts salvation almost in a works position? Like if we were to just kill them earlier, then they would go to heaven, and if we would be the saviors of the world at that point.
Yeah, I mean, we could be out with our signs marching against abortion, pro-life, but man, we get back inside behind closed doors and we're just like high five, and other babies were just aborted today. Yeah, that should strike you as right. And so look, when something is absurd like that and makes you go, that counts as evidence against the view, right? Doesn't prove it's false, but pay attention to your intuitions. I mean, if you trust that God has designed your intuitions to work properly, if you're and to at least, that's not to say they always give you right beliefs, but most of the time they're pretty good. So pay attention to them. And so unless you have really good reason to reject your intuitions, then you should, but pay attention to them. They count. It's kind of like some radar, God-given radar.
Yeah, that's right. That moral radar. It's like, we understand that to be, and see, I grew up on that same exact thing. And it wasn't until one of my mentors, he told me, he's like, well, Jared, it really doesn't say that babies do go to heaven. And then I was like, you're absolutely right. And it was just a more Christian tradition that we took this. And I think, with all love and respect to people before me, but I think they took it as like, we all hope this. And this is the best answer we have. And this is all we can go off of. And they want that so much. But just as you stated, the problems start adding up. It almost contradicts other doctrinal positions of the Bible. You're almost like, okay, well, for us to take just a couple verses and say we're, doing proper exegesis and coming to this conclusion, well, then we'd be actually contradicting other positions that we know that are their solid truth. That's where the problem comes in. I that was very informative to me, and that's when I loved when you had talked about that, and the question at the very end that your colleague talked about, of going from the saved state to the not saved state to the saved state. You're like, what is happening here? It almost feels like a bad game of poker once you get down to it. You know what I mean? You're like, man, I had a full flush if I would have just pulled that other card. But anyways, let's go on to this next one, because this is another one that I think this is pushed on people and used as abuse more than anything. But all infants who die go to hell. Go ahead and respond to that.
Well, that's just an absurd view. I've got some, I share some quotes under this view here in my article about where this came from. But, ultimately, a minority of folks today hold the view that all unbaptized babies who die go to hell. Again, I'm going to say, no, that's absurd. That should make you go, there's your theological intuition again. But because why would God, a maximally great and perfectly loving being, send anyone to suffer the eternal holocaust of hell for a choice they could not make, a choice they weren't even aware of? So I contend that a good God, a perfectly loving God, 1 John 4:8, God is love, right? He is perfect. A maximally great being would not send anyone to suffer into the infinite future for a choice they were powerless to make, a choice they didn't even know existed. So, no, I'm going to reject that hypothesis. And thankfully, I think most Christians will reject it as well.
Yeah, because that would go into the point of God would do something evil. And like you said, if God is a maximally great and perfect loving being, him being infinite, we can come to that philosophical point. Him being infinite, he lacks nothing.
Right.
Therefore, he cannot be unloving or evil because that would be a lack in him, and he can't stop being him. It would be a logical contradiction. So we know right there, okay, this can't be true. We wouldn't, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but we wouldn't even have to look at the Bible to know any of that. We could even come to that philosophically to say, no, this would not even be true because of God's objective goodness and love and his character and his nature of who he is. So, okay, we're going to get into the next one. This is really on a pro-life
Yeah.
abortion, honestly, talk. So I'm really excited about this one. Part 3, babies are not persons. Go and respond to that.
Yeah, so it's cool. I mean, we showed how on that first view, how, if all babies die, go to heaven, then Christians should actually be pro-abortion, right?
Right.
But here we're gonna I think make a good case against abortion here.
Right.
So babies are not persons. This view avoids the problem, supposedly that by rejecting the idea that babies have souls, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you need to be a personal being, at least a person in the Imago Dei anyway. But
Right.
so anyway, accordingly, we don't have to worry about babies going to hell, but they don't go to heaven either. They don't go anywhere because no person exists at all. There's no soul
Mm-hmm.
in the baby. Now, based on biology, we know that at the moment of conception, we have a complete, unique, living human being in the mother's womb. So yeah, to get us into some pro-life
Yeah.
apologetics here. The preborn baby, the preborn human. Well,
Yeah.
I won't even jump there yet. I'll say the preborn is complete. That means from the moment of fertilization, the preborn child is complete, right? All the information that needs to be there is there. It simply needs time to grow.
Mm-hmm.
It's unique, right? It's not like the mother's appendix, right? I wrote that the scientific evidence of DNA proves that the preborn child is unique and genetically distinct from his or her mother. So the preborn child is not a part of the mother, like an appendix,
Mm-hmm.
but a unique entity inside his or her mother. It's living. We know this. Whatever it is, it's alive. The
Mm-hmm.
laws of biology tell us that the preborn child is alive because it's growing, it's developing, and it's undergoing metabolism and it's responding to stimuli. That's what a living thing does. And finally, we know that it's human because the scientific law of biogenesis states that living things reproduce after their own kind. So
Mm-hmm.
dogs beget dogs, cats beget cats, goldfish beget goldfish, and humans beget humans, not parasites or blobs of cells, but humans, complete and unique living human beings. So therefore, it's clear that a human exists. Even even the preborn is a human being.
Mm-hmm.
However, the question is raised: is this human a person with a soul in the image of God or not? Now, I personally find the view that a baby is not a person to be untenable, and I've argued extensively for substance dualism, which is the view that a person is an immaterial soul in the image of God who has a body, and the soul/person can also exist apart from the body. We can make this case biblically and philosophically. But yeah, Paul believed that he could survive the death of his body and be present with the Lord. So as a substance dualist, there are several views to consider as to how the soul becomes integrated with the physical body. Now, I'm persuaded that the soul is passed along from the parents just as physical DNA is. And that's a view called traducianism. Traducianism. So thus, if I'm right, then the soul begins to exist at the moment of conception. So ultimately, if we are not sure if something is a person or not, well, it's better to be safe than sorry and treat anything that might be a person as a person. For example, if a farmer was, pitching hay bales, and he thought there was a chance, even a small chance, that a kid was hiding in a pile of hay straw, then the farmer should not jab the hay straw with a pitchfork, right? That would be irresponsible. Just as the farmer ought to assume that a person might be in the pile of hay, we ought to assume that the human baby is a person, especially when there's a good philosophical case that it is, not to mention a logical case. But we do know it's a human.
Right.
Anyway, for these reasons, I reject that hypothesis.
I love that. I love that one, because you don't even have to be a Christian to have that position. It's like, no, here we go. Even I believe it was Christopher Hitchens. He was pro-life.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Christopher Hitchens, who was an atheist. I'm almost done reading his book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. And he was pro-life. And it's interesting that even the position of an atheist can still look at the scientific evidence and understand, no, this is a human being, period. There was,
I'm sure Christopher Hitchens didn't think that he had a soul.
Right.
He had a soul, right? So the argument that, babies don't have souls, so we can kill them.
Right.
Well, the atheist doesn't think anybody's is a soul. So they've just got to stop with human, definitely, right? And they should. And we should too. Everybody should. A human is a human. You don't kill humans.
Right.
Yeah. So Hitchens was being logically consistent there.
It really leads to, when we look at the concept. I had one student come up to me, and this student was really wanting to fight on this point, so I would ask questions, and the student came up to me and they said, well, I don't believe babies are a person. I said, what do you mean by that? They're like, well, I believe you become a person later. I said, well, I've never met a human being who wasn't a person. So, and why are we saying that your standard depends on personhood? Who says your standard is the personhood definition of, well, we have to wait till this point they become a person? Well, according to who? You? You're just changing and hearing other things too, where some people believe it's, in the womb. Some people believe it's in the birth canal. Some people believe it's a year later, 2 years later. Like, there has to be an objective standard that we all hold to, and we can find that scientifically, as you stated.
Yeah, and like I said, if you're not sure, err on the side of it's a person.
Yeah, and I love your example of the farmer and the pitchfork.
I can't remember who did this, but I saw an animated thing once, or maybe it was just a comic strip kind of thing. But it was these two guys driving in a Jeep, I think, and one guy, the guy on the passenger side, is like, "What is that up, down the road? It's laying in the middle of the road," and the driver's like, "I don't know. I'm just going to run it over." And the passenger's like, "It looks like it might be a person." He's like, "Don't be ridiculous. I'm just going to drive over this thing." He goes, "No, it looks like it really could be a person. I don't know for sure if it is, but it looks like it might be." "Don't be ridiculous. You have no idea that thing is a person. I'm just going to run it over." I know that just shows the absurdity there. But there's even an argument to be made that it might be a person.
Right.
Hey, slow down. driver. In fact, you might want to pull over and just double check.
Let's check on
If there's
them.
a person, help him.
Right.
You don't run it over.
And it's almost like they would go to that point, like no reasonable person would lay in the middle of a street at night, so it can't be a person.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I love that though. That's perfect. So, all right, let's move on to our next one. And this is really right up your alley. I love this one. And if you guys have not had a chance to read it yet, make sure you go buy Tim's book about Molinism. So I got my copy right here. I started it and it's amazing. It's a great book. Oh, there you go. There you go. You know the author, you can get it signed, so that's good.
Yeah, I autograph my own books for me.
There you go. You're like, you have it on a plaque in the back. I got the author.
It's funny. Yesterday was Mother's Day, and just joking around. I got my wife some flowers, and at the end of all of my videos and blogs, I always say stay reasonable.
Yeah.
I said you're the best wife ever, blah blah. And I said stay reasonable, and I autographed it. She got a kick out of it.
That's awesome. That's perfect. She's like, oh, look at you. Yeah, but make sure you guys go get the book, Human Freedom, Divine Knowledge, and Mere Molinism, a biblical, historical, theological, and philosophical analysis. Make sure you guys go buy that book. Amazing, amazing book. So this is right up in that. Did you want to say something else? Yeah, there makes study guide too. Make sure to go get the study guide with it.
Yeah, it's a little short workbook that you can work your way through, and I also go deeper in almost each chapter and provide some more, some additional information to consider. So
perfect. I love it. Make sure you guys go get the book, go get the study guide. Awesome help. So this is leading into the next part. So let's get into the next part. So the next one is, it depends on if the baby was one of the elect or not. What is that talking about, Tim?
Yeah, I've heard this several times. The first time, when I first wrote this article and I was interviewing different theologians and pastors, this was offered to me by somebody who I would call a hyper Calvinist. Mm-hmm. And I've written extensively as to why this brand of Calvinism is logically incoherent. So I would recommend the book you just recommended. Got some other books coming out on this topic as well. But be that as it may, let's look at what John Calvin said. And he said, quote, individuals are born who are doomed, or I'm sorry, let me start over. Quote, individuals are born who are doomed from the womb to certain death and are to glorify him by their destruction. Right. So that's from John Calvin in the Institutes of Christian Religion, Book 3, Chapter 23, Paragraph 6. Let me say it again. Individuals are born who are doomed from the womb to certain death and are to glorify God by their destruction. That is a horrible view, right?
That sounds like Molech in the Old Testament.
Right. Oh. I like to say that Calvinists are Christians, but Calvinism is not Christianity. Mm-hmm. And this is just a horrible view. But anyway, here's the deal. If Calvin believed that certain humans are doomed from the womb, then it follows that some babies who die in the womb or after birth are doomed to hell. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, this view runs into the same problems as the second hypothesis that we looked at. Mm-hmm. And I'll just say that a perfectly good and loving God would not send anyone to suffer the eternal holocaust of hell for a choice they were powerless to make. So thank God that Calvin was wrong and this view of Calvinism is false. God does not need babies burning in the eternal fires of hell to receive glory, right? The cross was enough. Mm-hmm. Jesus paid it all. The cross was enough. God doesn't need babies burning in hell for his own glory. So I adamantly reject that hypothesis.
Yeah, man, that's the hardest one out of all of these, to be honest with you. Out of all of them, that's the one where, like I said, it reminds me of that sacrificial system of Molech we hear about in the Old Testament. And it truly, and it again comes back to the philosophical position, that is evil. So God could not logically do it. And if they say that God could logically do it, then their God is not the God of the Christians, like you stated. It's like Calvinists can be Christians, but Calvinism is not Christian.
Yeah, I've got just really quickly, I've got
Mm-hmm.
a video I just recorded that will be out shortly on my YouTube channel, Free Thinking Ministries YouTube channel. So
Yep.
make sure to subscribe and like and ring the bell and all that kind of stuff. But this will be out soon. But I'm giving 5 reasons as to why Calvinism is false. And I used to be a hardcore Calvinist, by the way. I used to be a Calvinist preaching pastor who would preach Calvinism from the pulpit. But once I looked under the hood and really saw what was underneath the hood of Calvinism, realized I had to leave it. So ultimately, and I won't give all the details here, but I argue that Calvinism is a low view of God. It's a low view of God's word. It's a low view of man created in the image of God. It's a low view of sin. And finally, it's a low view of the gospel, or at least a different gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And as Paul says in Galatians, let the preacher of a different gospel be accursed. So somebody's wrong here. Either the Calvinists are wrong or non-Christian Calvinists are wrong. Mm-hmm. And somebody deserves to be accursed, according to Paul. So I recommend people checking out my YouTube channel to see that video. It should be out.
How long was your debate with Dr. James White? Because you debated him, correct?
Yeah, it was a little over a year ago when I debated in Houston. That was my first debate. So you'll see, those who watch, you'll see me. I'm very nervous. I'll just be honest. I was scared. James White is a heavyweight champ when it comes to debate. I think that was, somebody told me that was like around his 300th debate, and that was my first. I knew that I'd never even had a class on how to debate,
right?
Let alone even debated in the past. So I went into this just fresh rookie. If people look at that and just get past my nerves and not knowing how to always, or at least not always having the best style, just analyze the arguments I gave and see if he ever debunks any of my arguments. I feel very good about the debate as far as the content goes. I look at it and I was like, I've had a debate since then, and I practiced my style.
But that's all. And see, that give you some comfort, brother. That's all experience of just participating in that. It's just like playing a game more and more and more and more. But we are our own worst critic, though, to be honest. Like,
oh, no. I mean, I got to tell you, I mean, that's all I hear from so many Calvinists online is, look how bad Stratton's style was. Like he lost the debate. And I'm like, look at the content. I gave arguments for my position. How were my arguments defeated? They weren't. So I don't care how bad I looked.
It's like, read the transcript. Read the transcript.
Right. I did. I published the transcript, the written transcript of the entire debate on my website. So for anybody that wants to say, well, you look so nervous. Well, I'm like,
well, yeah, duh, it's James White. What else am I going to be? Yeah, sure. I'm going to be relaxed against Michael Jordan. Yeah, it's going to be fine.
Well, I'll say, and the cool thing is this, I've not talked to any scholar, Calvinist scholars included, anybody with a PhD behind their name, or any other Calvinist scholar who said that I lost that debate. Everyone I've talked to, including some Calvinists who despise my arguments, all said, you still won the debate. Hate to say it, but you won the debate.
See, that's cool.
I had one guy say, you looked horrible and stumbled all the way down the field while you scored the game-winning touchdown.
and see, that's the thing. It's just it's those kind of things that where we have to go through those things. I've not had a debate or anything. I've hosted, but I've not had a debate, so I would be very nervous. Especially going up against James White. I'd be like, hey James, so can I get like give me a couple handicaps here? What can we do? You know what I mean? So but yeah, brother, you did just fine. Don't worry. You're doing a great job. That's why I truly mean that, where it's like you're going up against someone who, like you said, 300 debates. It becomes almost like, hey, you want to go to lunch type of casual sitting for him. But all right, let's head on to, we only have 2 more and we'll be all done. The next one is a very interesting one. But it's the eternal limbo position. Go ahead and address that for us.
Yeah. So one theologian I interviewed offered me this view that infants who die do not go to hell, but they don't go to heaven either. And so he said, by God's grace, perhaps they go to a state of limbo where they exist in an eternal baby state, and they are happy babies into the infinite future. And so I wound up calling this the eternal nursery theory. And so I said this eternal nursery seems quite bizarre. I understand doctrines being begotten from other doctrines, such as due to God's grace.
Yep.
He will give them the chance to gain epistemic access to the gospel. But this strange solution is against the character of God, it seems to me. So think about it. God is keeping these creatures, these babies, from becoming rational agents that could not even have the knowledge that they are loved by God, right? God is keeping that from them. They will never have the knowledge that they're loved by God as babies. And I just think that's just the epitome of absurdity. It's weird. I'm going to reject that hypothesis. I don't know. What do you think about that?
Well,
idea?
that one, as soon as I read that one, I don't know. Do you remember the movie The Others with Nicole Kidman? Do you remember that? It came out in the 90s. It was this weird little suspense horror movie. And it was a twist. It was a plot twist at the end. And this reminded me of that, where the whole concept of the movie, and again, spoilers, if no one's ever seen it, here you go. Here's what the twist is at the end. But the whole movie, the young kids are being tormented by, they think there's spirits in the house. And it's spooky because you don't see anything the whole time. You just hear them, and that there's another boy in the house. Well, you find out at the end of the movie that the children were killed by their mother, and they're the spirits. And the limbo that they're in is now their house. And that is their eternal limbo, or their eternal nursery at the very end of the movie.
Wow.
So that's what this reminded me of their eternal nursery is the nurture of their mother before their mother went crazy and killed them. And so that's what this reminded me of when it came down to it, of this idea that God's going to hold himself back from children. And it just contradicts Jesus so much. Of course, the whole Old Testament, but Jesus specifically with this position, let the little children come to me, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. You're like, and if this Jesus and the eternal limbo Jesus is kind of like, hey, let's just keep them in the nursery. Yeah, they're good there. They're good there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, you'll have to check out the movie The Others. The Others. I ruined the ending for you, but it's still interesting. But
I'll check it out. I don't think I've ever heard of it before. So
we watched that movie the first time I was at my parents' house, and they just got surround sound in their house. It was when surround sound first became a big deal. And there's a part in the movie where you hear footsteps, and the footsteps went behind us on the surround. Oh, it was spooky. But anyways, last one, and then we'll be done for the evening. And this is the one we're really going to look at. God knows who would have chosen and rejected him if given the opportunity.
Yeah. So as a systematic theologian, I'm always trying to put my theology together as a big puzzle. So I've got all these different puzzle pieces. And so I say that there's this missing piece of the puzzle, and I'm trying these different ideas out. These are like different puzzle pieces, trying to see if they fit. So in the article, I was referring to all these different hypotheses as different puzzle pieces. And so I said, of all the puzzle pieces I've tried out so far, this one seems like it might fit. However, it still feels like it's not a perfect fit. So you know what it's like when you're putting a puzzle together and they're all snapping into place, and then you find one and it looks like it fits, and you can get it in there, but it doesn't snap like the other ones do, right? You know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and you just don't like, you're like, it looks like it fits. I mean, maybe it's part of the puzzle where it's all like the same color. So it's like, well, it looks like it fits. It doesn't, it's the same color as its surroundings, but it just, how come this one isn't snapping into place like the rest of them? And so This is why I don't think it's a perfect fit. And so why I'm reluctant to put all my eggs into that basket, to mix metaphors here. But okay, so with 2 Corinthians 4:17 in mind, I've argued that this world filled with all of its affliction, all of its evil, pain, suffering, and affliction prepares us for eternity. Prepares us, as Paul says, for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. However, if this hypothesis is correct, then this would be a defeater to my thought experiment, and possibly a defeater to the Apostle Paul's view as well. And moreover, if our eternal destiny can be judged based upon what God knew each one of us would do given a fair chance, then why does God not just forego our current affliction-filled world and send each person directly to heaven or hell in the first place? In fact, there'd be no need to even create those who would freely choose to be damned, and those who would have freely chosen God could avoid all the pain and suffering that comes along with our current state of affairs. So if this is the case, then perhaps God, given his middle knowledge, and I believe God's got middle knowledge, talk about that in the book you referenced that I wrote. It could be the case that he's so orchestrated the world in such a way that the infants who die happen to be like the 2/3 of the angels who did not fall. And unlike you and I, they did not need to experience light momentary afflictions to prepare them for eternity. So if push comes to shove, I think I could live with this option. In fact, when I was still a pastor, I had to do 2 baby funerals for the same family within a year. And that was tough. And I talked about, they had questions, big questions, right? And so I talked about this possibility that maybe their kids were better than me in a sense.
Right.
They didn't need to learn from all these pain, evil, and all this pain, evil, and suffering. They didn't need the afflictions that I need. It's like some people are able to learn from the mistakes of others. Others need to experience those mistakes themselves.
Yeah.
Maybe God knows, given his middle knowledge, that these babies would learn from my mistakes, or the mistakes of. So that could be the case, and I'm cool with that. I'm the kind of guy that has to learn the hard way.
Yeah, me too.
Right, and God knew that. He knew that I had to experience the consequences for my stupidity, that I wouldn't learn from others. God knew that, so he created me and allowed me to experience this myself. So I'm cool with that. I can live with this option. But like I said, this is one of those puzzle pieces that it seems like it fits, but it doesn't snap into place like the rest of the puzzle pieces. So I don't reject this hypothesis. I'm open to it. It might be the best explanation of everything that's been put on the table so far, but I'm still looking for a better puzzle piece, the one that will snap into place. So that leads us to the last part of my article.
Yeah, I think that one, it was satisfying for me also. And just how you described it, it fits the best of what we have now. And it makes the most sense because thinking philosophically across the board, regardless of what we want to think, you and I are still here experiencing our suffering from our stupidity in life and learning from those things. And those babies are not who had passed away. So regardless if we want to say, well, that's not true. Well, you and I are still experiencing the suffering and learning when it comes down to the end result of that sanctification of, getting more and more like Christ. And, even an analogy, I love the analogy you gave with, the angels in heaven. I thought about just, that one kid in class that never has to study, that I was a person who had to study for weeks and weeks and weeks to pass the test. And this kid shows up, hasn't been at school for 2 weeks. Oh, we got a test today. All right. And aces it. Yeah, no problem. It's like, in the simplicity of that, it's almost breaking it down like that. But I'm very satisfied with that answer when it comes down to it, because it shows still God's loving character and who he is, his nature. but it also shows the middle knowledge of God, of this is the maximum, this is the world that is maximum amount of people saved, a minimal amount of people lost, in creation. Um, so I think this one, even for me, um, was very fitting, and that's why I even messaged you on Facebook and said this actually helped me kind of put a face to it and understand that someone else was satisfied with this, and that kind of gave me comfort in that.
Yeah, and on that view, no baby who dies is going to hell,
Right, exactly.
right? And every baby who dies
It's like,
does go to
like
heaven,
Matthew McConaughey Bible.
right? um, yeah. So on that
Sorry.
view, if God's got middle knowledge, if Molinism is true,
Mhm.
we can make sense. We can make it fit. It might not be a puzzle piece that snaps into place, but it works.
Right.
So
So
I can live with that, you know. But
what do we do, Tim? What do we do with all this?
well, so this is where I I, I kind of get myself into trouble because I'm like, all right, look, that piece fits, but it doesn't snap into place. I'm looking for something better.
Hmm.
And so many times, when scientists are trying to make sense of the physical universe, they postulate ideas or the existence of other things that they do not have direct access to
Hmm.
in order to make sense of everything in which they do have access. So sometimes these postulations are confirmed in the future, and sometimes they're not, or at least not yet.
Hmm.
But sometimes these postulations are either falsified or come to be dismissed for other reasons. So examples of postulating things that scientists do, like the multiverse.
Yep.
You hear that a lot, and that's eventually worked its way into the comic books and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
Which is awesome. But
Right. Like I don't think the multiverse exists, but I'm glad that the comic books have.
right.
It makes for great movies.
Yes, it does.
Let's see, dark matter,
Hmm.
something called the God particle. A few years
Hmm.
ago, they eventually discovered um, a static block universe where temporal becoming is an illusion. That's been posited. Many scientists hold that today. The ether and even evolution from a single-celled common ancestor. These are all things that scientists hypothesize to try to make sense of reality, right?
Hmm.
Doesn't mean they're true. These are just things that they hypothesize,
Right.
try to make sense of things. Well, so with that in mind, since the Bible is not clear as to what happens to infants when they die, I did something similar, and I made a speculative theological move, and I postulated something that's extra biblical, an extra biblical idea that was not anti-biblical.
Hmm.
Right, so that's something systematic theologians can do. Right, we can never postulate something that's anti-biblical,
Right.
at least if you're a Christian systematic
Right.
theologian. Right,
Right. Exactly.
right. So I will never. I mean, if I'm postulating an idea or advancing a topic that can be shown, if somebody could say, hey, Tim, nice try, but look, open up here to this book and this chapter and compare that over here with this chapter and look at biblical case here. What you're saying can't be true.
Mm.
If that's the case, I drop it in a heartbeat. And that's why I left Calvinism,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
I was, I
exactly.
saw too much. I'm like, oh, I can't hold this view anymore.
Hmm.
So now we are free as systematic theologians to posit extra biblical ideas. It just cannot contradict scripture. But now let me say this: I am uncomfortable with this is called speculative theology. I'm uncomfortable with speculative theology, and I try to avoid it as much as possible. And I think we should only resort to speculative theology or to this maneuver, as I called it in the
Hmm.
article, if all other options seem to have been exhausted. And so at this point, I see no other option if we're going to have a logically consistent, systematic theology. I can't talk. I cannot talk theology right now. And by that, I'm saying if all these puzzle pieces aren't snapping into place. So again, the last one we talked about, it fit, but it didn't snap. And
Right.
so I'm the one that snaps. So if we're going to do that, well, I'll just say that the Bible reveals that God is perfectly just, righteous, loving, and good. And with that in mind, how do we make sense of the fact that we know that many babies die? And because of abortion, over 50 million have been legally murdered in America just in my lifetime. I mean, man, I wrote this article back in 2016. So just think of how many more have been murdered since then. So since I'm convinced that the objective purpose of human existence is to love God, that's why we exist. Matthew 22, 36 and 38, Jesus makes it clear that the purpose of our existence is love. We were created on purpose and for the specific purpose of loving each person of the Trinity, and each person of the Trinity is ever created. That's why we exist. So life is all about love. To miss that mark is to sin, and love spelled backwards is evil, right?
Yeah, there you go.
So I'm convinced that the objective purpose of human existence is to love God, and that the true and maximal love, that true and maximal love requires the ability to make a free and informed decision and a true love relationship. A marriage with God, a marriage with God is heaven. That's the case. So anyway, with all that in mind, since the Bible is not clear on this issue, one might postulate the following. So I've said this. If one's not satisfied with the middle knowledge view, you could say it could be the case that not all babies who die will necessarily go to heaven. However, it could be that all babies who die get to eventually make a free choice if they want to be with God for eternity or not. So now this, we kind of made fun of the limbo view, but this might be similar to the limbo view that we talked about earlier, except in this hypothesis, the baby gets to be in a state of affairs where they get to learn and eventually make a free and informed decision. They become rational beings under God's care, as it were, right?
Okay. Yep.
And they eventually get to make a free and informed decision if they want to love God in return. And maybe, perhaps that's all babies. Perhaps that's all of them. And God would know that given his middle knowledge too. So anyway, at the time of this free and informed decision, the baby would no longer be a baby, but rather a spiritual adult, genuinely responsible and accountable for his or her decision. So the baby does not experience that irresistible grace that Calvinists like to talk about, but does receive amazing grace to eventually make a free and informed decision. Perhaps Dr. William Lane Craig discussed this with the angels and the angelic realms before they got to make a decision to rebel against God or not. Dr. Craig called this an epistemic arm's length. So maybe these babies get to make this free and informed decision at an epistemic arm's length as well. But anyway, here's the cool thing. Back in 2016, when I was thinking through these things and interviewing different theologians and pastors who held these different ideas, I'd written all these out. I went to the EPS conference, the Evangelical Philosophical Society conference, and that year it was held in San Antonio. And I talked to Dr. Kirk McGregor, who wrote the foreword to my book, and we were sitting at a table talking about this, and he said some things to me just off the top of his head that blew my mind. And he said, man, I could see why this speculative theological hypothesis could work with other biblical data. So Kirk said something to me, and I said, whoa, can you type that out and send it to me? And so he did. So here's what Kirk said. Let me read it for you. He said, it could be that at Jesus's second coming, all children who previously died without the opportunity to embrace Jesus are resurrected from the dead as children. During the millennium, they would grow up and thus gain the opportunity to accept or reject Jesus as their Lord. If they accept Jesus, they will proceed into the new heaven and new earth. If they reject Jesus, they will be consigned to hell at the great white throne judgment. Two lines of evidence converge to make this, in my mind, probable, he says. First, we know that there will be no marriage and thus no sexual reproduction after the general resurrection of believers that occurs at Christ's second coming. If you believe in the rapture, then before the second coming. Second, the Old Testament descriptions of what I take to be the millennium feature children. For instance, Isaiah 65:20 reports, "Never again will there be in it an infant who lives but a few days." Isaiah 11:8 further states, "The infant will play near the cobra's den, and the young child will put its hand into the viper's nest." So, yeah, my question is, where do these children come from? They can't come from sexual reproduction, right? And so then Kirk said this. He says, "Thus I speculate and speculate that these children are the children who perish without salvific opportunity during the present age."
Mm-hmm.
So in the end, I believe that no one goes to heaven or hell by accident, and that all people get exactly what they want and freely choose for all eternity. A
Yep.
true love marriage into the infinite future with their creator, or as C.S. Lewis described, an eternal divorce from him. To those who have lost, and I want to make this clear. Here's where my pastoral heart comes into this, because I know there's people who have lost little ones and who really care about this topic because of that. So I don't want to be too philosophical.
Yeah.
About this. And so I should say to those who have lost a little one, I am confident that God will grant your son or daughter every opportunity to know and love him as they would have received growing up in your home, if not much more. And if Kirk was right, you might still get the opportunity to raise your child in the new heaven, right? Let that sink in. I get goosebumps.
Yeah, I did too. That's
right.
and that I've done the same thing where I had to do 3 babies' funerals in a year.
Yeah.
And it was each one it was interesting. Each one handled it differently. And the last one, because I always teach, even I in our adult class, I teach the people there, don't say anything at a funeral, just be there.
Yeah.
And I said, but if you're a pastor, I said, there's a couple different ways when people come up and ask you a question. I said, there's usually a pastoral answer, there's a philosophical answer, and there's a friend answer. And the friend answer is usually no answer at all. It's just, I'm here to love you.
Yeah.
The pastoral answer is usually the answer of that comfort. Let's go through this. I'm here to comfort you. I'm here to help you. I want to be a voice to help give you comfort from God's word. And the philosophical answer is understand the why. And the last funeral that we did, the mom had asked me, she had gone through a whole stage. It was her little one got cancer. He was 2, and she went through almost 8 months in the hospital so her mind was already preparing, and grieving along the way. So she was at a different stage at the very end compared to the other 2 funerals that I did. She was at a different stage of, I know my little one is not going to make it. And she had already grieved in this period of time, at least from my observation. And she had asked me, my wife and I went up to visit her and her little one the night before they were going to take him off the vent the next day, take him off life support. And we went up there, and she just looked me in the eye, not mad, not upset, but genuinely curious, where she said, why do babies die? And so, she was at that point of ready for the philosophical answer. Um, After experiencing so much, I would never have done that with the other two that I did. But this one young lady, she was ready for that answer. But then the next question came up, well, why does my baby die? And so we went through that philosophically. And it came back to exactly what you just said at the very end, where even leading philosophically can lead us back to a pastoral answer of love and comfort, to know who God is, to know that he's objectively loving, does not want anyone to perish, and that he died for us. And it was just a heartwarming event, because I told her in this moment, I said, your little one is going to be in the hands of a loving God that created the universe, and I trust him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love what you said, though. It's very important of knowing, yes, it's always good to have the answers philosophically, but coming back to the pastoral position of, we're grieving with you, we're helping you down this path, you're not going down this alone. I think is very important too.
Yeah, my thing when I was a pastor, especially the last 5 years of working at church, uh, before I just really focused on apologetics and
Hmm.
systematic philosophy all the time. Um, I had to do a lot of funerals, and the problem of evil,
Hmm.
some form of the problem of evil, I could count on that being asked of me.
Hmm.
And so that's really what kind of that played a big role in pushing me and
Hmm.
influencing me to answer all of these problems of evil.
Hmm.
Um, and as a like you said, pastoral response provides comfort. But I found that a good pastoral response should also include good and true philosophy,
Absolutely.
true theology, good
Yep.
philosophy, and comfort at the same time.
Yep.
You want to
Absolutely.
find a way to give it all simultaneously.
Hmm.
So I did try to do that, but
Yeah, and
anyway,
I think Jesus is that great model for us, that he did all of that into one with people. I think that's awesome.
ultimately, like I said, I think this is the toughest theological problem out of all the theological problems. Um, and I like, I call this article on my website that I wrote back in 2016 the most controversial article on my entire website. And believe me, I've written some controversial uh, articles. But look, I just want to say that I had, like I said it in the article too, I admit that this is purely speculative,
Hmm.
and that this hypothesis could be wrong.
Hmm.
It's likely it's wrong, right? So with that said, I'm willing to be wrong here.
Hmm.
I'm not going to hold this grip, or I'm not going to hold this with a tight grip. I'll
Hmm.
let it go if somebody can show me why I should not even consider it as a hypothesis.
Yeah.
Um, but I will continue to test this hypothesis and have this conversation with other theologians and philosophers, and I have since then.
Mhm.
I mean, this came out in 2016. It's now 2023, and I've had this conversation quite a bit. And to date, I haven't seen a good reason to reject this
Mm-mm.
hypothesis. I'm still looking for a good reason to do so. So if I find reason to reject this view and change my mind, I will gladly do so, write an article, make a video, come here and talk about it with you.
Mhm. Yeah.
I am
And
committed to truth. And so I feel some freedom to do speculative theology as
mhm.
long as it doesn't contradict scripture.
Right.
Um, but I'm looking for, I'll just say I could be missing something
Mhm.
in scripture that just destroys the whole thing. So if that happens, please show me. I'm willing to be wrong and change
Yep.
my mind.
Absolutely. And I totally agree. This is probably the most controversial and I would say the most difficult question to answer with this. It's either, I ran into, until I found William Lane Craig's position that you brought up about the angels, possibility of why did Satan sin if he's in heaven, in the arm's length position. And, same thing with Adam and Eve, the arm's length position. That made sense to me. And I felt like that question and this question are probably the two most difficult questions to answer. This one outweighs that one far more because this one affects us, I think, more. We think of angels as a distant thing. We're not, we don't see angels or any of that, but babies we see, babies we have, babies we've
And we
lost.
love.
Yeah, and babies we love.
Yeah,
Yes,
right.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I think this one means more.
And I mean, and I've written a lot about this too, but and this is all connected to
Mhm,
that passage I brought up, 2 Corinthians 4:17.
mhm,
Light momentary afflictions prepare us for an eternal weight of glory. And so you bring up Adam and Eve and Satan and a third of all the angels. They were created in the presence of God, even if it was at an arm's length, still
mhm,
somewhat in the presence of God, uh, uh, in a suffering-free state of affairs.
mhm.
They wrecked it. They took it for granted and wrecked it for everybody.
That's
But
right.
think of all the pain, evil, and suffering that you've experienced.
Mhm,
I've experienced, that I see other people experiencing. And so when I close my eyes for the last time, take my last breath on this side of death, open my eyes on the other side of death, looking into the eyes of Jesus, which is what I want more than anything else in the world.
amen to that.
Right? That's all I want.
Mhm,
Right. um, but when I find myself in that state of affairs, I'm not going to take that for granted, unlike Adam and Eve, Satan, and a third of all the angels did.
mhm.
Right? They took it for granted. I will not
Right.
that state of affairs for granted. I will savor it for eternity. Why? Because I've learned how stupid it is to not follow the law of Christ.
Mhm.
I've seen all the pain, evil, and suffering that it leads to. Uh, so there's something. I think that's what Paul has in mind in 2 Corinthians 4:17. That's why suffering is a gift
Yep.
in that
It
sense.
really is.
So again, this gets us back to what we were talking. Some people have to learn the hard way.
Mhm.
So God says, "Okay, all you stupid humans, you get to learn the hard way. You get to experience
Yep.
all this affliction that will prepare you for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison.
Mhm.
Unlike Adam and Eve, Satan, and a third of all the angels.
Yep.
But maybe the babies who
Mhm.
are like the 2/3 of the angels who did.
Mhm.
And so God, in his middle knowledge, has orchestrated the world so that the babies who die are those who didn't have to learn the hard way.
Yep. Absolutely.
Just some speculation.
I love it.
Yeah.
And
So,
I use that example with how much suffering I went through until I met my wife. You go through all these, you know, sad situations of dating and you're like, God, is this the right one? Is this the right one? And you're like, I thought this was the one. What
yeah.
happened? And you go through all that, then you get to your spouse and you're like, wow,
Yeah.
wow. I praise God for all the no answers. When
Right.
you're like, Lord, let this work out, let this work out. I was like, no, I have someone else for them and I have someone else for you. It's like me answering your prayer of yes would be their answer prayer of no. I
Yeah.
mean, but imagine what would happen if we just got our wives in the very beginning without having to suffer through
Oh, yeah.
anything.
Mhm.
It would pretty bad. It would end up pretty bad.
Yeah.
So, but Tim, thank you so much, brother, for coming on here with us and going through this tough question and answering it so well, so compassionate, so loving. And I think that's most important out of this tough question is understanding the truth, but with grace, gentleness, love, and respect. I love it so very much. So, my
Yeah.
friend, I appreciate you so very much for coming on here with me and being able to hang out for a little bit.
Yeah.
Make sure. Did you want to say anything before we close?
I just had a blast. When you asked me if I'd come on your show, I thought you were asking to talk about a different topic, and so I said yes. And then when I saw, oh, you want to talk about the baby thing, I was like, oh man, so this is the first. I've actually tried to avoid that topic,
Oh,
but I felt like I should probably. I mean, for interviews.
yep.
So this is the first time I've ever discussed it
Oh man.
on video or anything like that. And so thanks for being a gracious host. And
Yeah, man.
I'd love to have more conversations with you in the future. So.
Absolutely, my friend. Well, we appreciate you taking this question for us. I actually had several other questions, but this was the one that my wife was actually the one. She's like, but I want to know. So, yeah, so this really helped her. This is going to help her out. And so I really appreciate it, my friend. So, but guys, make sure to go buy Tim's book, Human Freedom, Divine Knowledge, and Mere Molinism, a biblical, historical, theological, and philosophical analysis. Make sure to go get this and buy the study guide with it. Amazing, amazing book. Make sure to get it. Also, go check out Tim on Free Thinking Ministries on his YouTube channel. Tons of great information. Plus, he's a superhero nerd. So if you really, because you just did a review of Guardians, didn't you?
Not really. I talked about it on Facebook.
That's what it was, on Facebook. I had just seen it. But yeah, make sure to go check out Tim on his Facebook. Go follow him on Free Thinking Ministries and go check him out on his YouTube channel and go support his ministry. He does fantastic work. He blesses me. So please go support his ministry, guys. But thank you, Tim, again for being with us today. Stay on the video, don't leave, and then we'll close. But all right, guys. Well, thank you guys for tuning in to Shield Apologetics, sharing his identity, evidentially leading doubters. Make sure to always hold on to Jesus, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.